since we are exploring this new perspective of what being in this new post-pandemic world means, either in terms of work, living, and learning. Okay, today we have the pleasure to have among us Robin de Carteret, okay, who's going to introduce us to a new perspective on how to see things around us, the systemic thinking. Robin de Carteret is the founder of Systems Game, which is a company in which he uses interactive group games to help people understand how complex living systems work. He does staff training, events, and teaches on a number of postgraduate and business programs. He has an MSc in holistic science from the Schumacher College, where he teaches. So Robin, it's up to you.
Thanks, Carl, and hi everyone. It's been really great, the conference so far. Thanks for putting it together. So I just wanted to start with this image. I don't know what you see here in this image, but I suppose I see a person who needs some wood to heat their home, to keep their family warm, and they're taking this resource, but they're not thinking about the long term, let alone the medium term impact of their actions. So if you take a step back, well, I sort of think of this as being a good metaphor for our current society, the behavior of our society at the moment in terms of things like climate change, biodiversity, amongst other things. But if you take a step back, then you can see that this is clearly a suicidal type of behavior. And so it's kind of confusing. Why are we acting in that way? I think the other confusing thing is that we seem to be understanding about what impacts we're having. We're understanding about the long-term impacts. We're even talking and saying the right words about being more sustainable, getting to net zero. But at the same time, we're still basically soaring away just as hard as we always have been, in terms of CO2. CO2 is still going up. And so I just think it's important to take a step back and go, why is this happening? Why are we acting in such a irrational way, a suicidal and literally unsustainable way? And I think the useful way to look at it is to say there is a mindset that Western industrialized society is based on, this reductionist thinking, splitting things into parts, linear thinking, and this ability to understand the world and then control it. And the thing is, this has been incredibly powerful. So it's amazing, it's given us all of these amazing technologies that we're now currently using to have this conversation. It's led to amazing positive impacts. But I think we've been seduced by how effective that way of thinking has been for the manipulation of the material world. And then we've started applying it to things where it doesn't apply well. So most of the systems that we actually deal with in the world are complex systems. They're not linear, mechanical systems. So things like the economy, people, crowds, politics, organisms, human body, health, ecosystems, the whole planet, the internet. So all of these things that we're dealing with are actually highly interrelated, complex systems. And so we need a different approach for them. And I'm sure everybody on this conference already knows this and is kind of thinking along those lines already. So we're needing this kind of mindset shift from what I would call a linear mechanistic way of thinking to one where we see the world as a complex living system, interrelated, nested system of complex parts interacting with each other. And this is quite a big shift that I think we actually need to make, and it's a hard thing to ask people to do. And just to kind of get our heads around it, I want to do a quick little activity to sort of demonstrate this change in perspective that we might need. So If you just point your finger up towards the ceiling and rotate it in a clockwise direction. So as you're looking up, you should see a clockwise circle as you're rotating your finger. Now, if you bring your hand down below your face, but keep on rotating in the same direction, now look down at your finger and tell me which way you see the circle rotating. So you should see that it's going anti-clockwise. And so you've got this shift in perspective where you're looking at the same reality, but seeing two opposite things. And this is, you know, this is a very simple demonstration of a shift in mindset. And when I'm doing this in person, I'll also go and get somebody to do that to me, and then I'll stand over them and look down at their rotating finger. And they'll be saying, my finger's going clockwise, and I'll be saying, no, it's going anti-clockwise. And so you can have two different people looking at the same system, the same reality, but with two different truths, which are both right. And I think the problem is, if you don't realize that this can happen in our world, then you can have conflict and wars and, you know, terrible kind of stalemates where you don't realize that you're actually potentially talking about the same thing, but you have these two different views of it. So I think that is important to recognize that. And just to kind of be clear, I'm not talking about moving away from linear thinking to a holistic type of thinking. I'm saying that we need to have both, because both are very important. I'm not saying to move away from them, but to basically rebalance. So I want to just look at one aspect of this whole area today, in terms of looking at order and how we maintain order. And by order, I mean the ability to do what you want, to have sort of predictability, to, for instance, produce a product that you want, to provide a service and for it to be what the customer wants, or to have an organization that operates in a sensible way where people can get their jobs done. And so we all need this order. But in the kind of linear way of thinking, the general story is to maintain this order, we need control. And so that might be policies and procedures, or hierarchical control, or reward or punishment mechanisms, all different ways to kind of keep control of the system. And what I want to show you today is that in complex living systems, we find emergent order. And so this is kind of this amazing opportunity to realize that we don't have to maintain control all the time. That we can actually allow the systems to go into a chaotic state, and from that there will be this emergent order. And I think it's worth pointing out that this sort of idea that we can have control over a system is actually an illusion. So you may try and exert control, you may well succeed in having quite a lot of control, but you can never fully control a complex system. As anyone who has kids or dogs, which are both living complex systems, would know, you know, you can train a dog to do amazing tricks and do exactly what you want, but every so often they may well do something completely unexpected, and you don't actually have full control over them. And I'm not sure that you would actually want to, because when you do exert control over intelligent beings like humans and teams and organizations, what tends to happen is that you can destroy the intelligence and the integrity of the people. So for instance, if you have too many procedures and policies, for instance, or targets or KPIs or whatever, people can actually end up not being able to express their intelligence in their roles. And so you can have the organization isn't really making use of the intelligence of that human being. And possibly worse, the same thing happens with compassion and humanity. So you can have a organization full of caring, compassionate human beings, but the actual system is effectively doing evil, you know, or doing very damaging actions. And this is, you know, I think, yeah, one of the ways that we seem to be able to be inflicting so much damage on ourselves and other people and the planet is that we have sort of created these organizations and systems that distance ourselves from our innate compassion and humanity. So I think that's a really important part of systems thinking, that says the problem is not evil people doing bad things, it's badly designed systems doing bad things, generally using people who are actually nice and caring and want to do good, make a difference. So that's actually very hopeful, because I think the idea that humans are inherently selfish and greedy, and I just don't believe it. I actually don't believe that, having met quite a lot of humans. I think most people seem to be very nice and caring when you actually meet them. So I think that's a really key point. So we want to, so we want to let go of control to kind of allow this creativity, but won't letting go of control mean chaos? I mean, that's the key worry. Don't we need to have a centralized control system if we want order? So, like I said, we find in natural systems that there is emergent order, and I want to show you an example of this from a living system that actually lives out in the woods nearby. It probably lives in the woods near you as well. It's a type of slime mold. These are microscopic amoeba, and you can see them moving around on the forest floor eating bacteria. This is under the microscope. So you could call this chaos, couldn't you? The movement of these creatures, these little organisms, they're very, very chaotically moving around, very unpredictable. But when they get hungry, they actually send out a signal called cyclic AMP, which encourages them to move towards the strongest part of that chemical signal. And they also give off the chemical as well. And so you get this emergent aggregation process where from a bunch of chaotic moving single-celled organisms, you get this coherent superorganism where they're all acting together to the point where they actually look like a kind of slug moving around. And this slug has intelligence. It has a kind of purpose. It wants to go somewhere, to get somewhere high enough to spread the spores, to find a new place where there's going to be more food. And so this is that slug superorganism moving along. And it's quite amazing to see that this is the same set of single-celled organisms, but they're just moving so tightly together that they look like a single body. And this entity, superorganism, actually has intelligence, so it's able to go uphill, and it knows when it's got there, but it doesn't have a brain or a nervous system. It doesn't even have any muscles, but it can move through the sort of dynamic interactions and movements of the way that they move with each other. And so when it gets to the top of a hill, it knows this, it senses this, and it can then transform into the next stage of its life cycle, where it grows into a sporing body. And again, this is the same little creatures, just moving, using reasonably simple rules and behaviors to interact with each other, but creating this incredibly complex emergent behavior. And this is all without any centralized control. You know, there is no brain, there is nothing telling or leading, there's no leadership here. This is all emergent behavior. So I found this incredibly fascinating to see, and I wanted to sort of try and replicate this in a way that meant you could play around with it. And so when I do face-to-face workshops in person, I would now get you to stand up and walk around the room, and I would teach you a little game where you're following each other and creating a similar kind of process as we just saw with the slime molds there. But online, I've actually written a computer program that does the same thing, so I can still sort of show you what's going on. And I think it's a really interesting idea that in reductionist science, to make things simple enough to comprehend and to understand, we've split them into parts. But the problem is, complex systems, it's the relationships between the parts that are as important or more important than the parts themselves or the behaviors of the parts themselves. So when you do reductionism, you split things into parts, you actually can lose most of the information you need about the system. So I was sort of thinking, well, how can you study complex whole systems, because they're so amazingly complex and hard to understand? One way to do it is to make mini whole systems. So this is kind of like a miniature whole system that we can play around with and kind of get our head around what's going on. So in this game, each person lets these little darts are following two other people. So the purple dart is following the green and the blue dart, and they need to move to be equidistant from the two other darts that she's following, right? And so she can be anywhere on this line, dotted line that goes between the two other people that she's following. And if the other people move, so if the blue dot moves, then the purple one needs to move again to stay equidistant from the other one. And don't worry too much if you haven't got that, because we're not going to play it. I'm going to do a model anyway, but just so you've got a sense of what's going on here. And so this is pretty interesting, because this miniature complex system can basically represent all sorts of different real complex systems. So if it was modeling a metaphor for the economy, the different people elements could be investment, well-being, innovation, GDP. If it was the climate system, it could be sea temperature, ice cover, CO2 levels. And if it was organizational dynamics, then it might be like working hours, productivity, enjoyment at work. And so as these different parts of the system move around, they're representing, you know, how much enjoyment people are having in the organization, or how what working hours you have decided to set, or, you know, the productivity or the profit of the organization. And so just to start with, I'll do a really simple example where you've got three elements in the system. And as you might expect, quite ordered. They just find themselves, they find a solution to their problem, and it's an equilateral triangle, and they've done that. Okay, that's not too surprising. Now, if we have four, again, they're just following their simple rules. And here you have just a tiny bit more, you know, unpredictability, but they basically find, again, the solution, which is this trapezium shape where they're all equilateral to each other quite quickly, and again, very ordered. So small groups of interacting elements are very ordered. What happens if we have 15 though? So again, remember, no one is leading this. I'm not doing anything to this. I'm just letting these elements move around according to the behaviors that they want to follow. And what we see is this effectively chaos coming out of these very simple rules. And as you can see now, these little parts of the system are now moving around in a way that's pretty much unpredictable. If I said to you, can you tell me where number one is going to be in the next 10 seconds? You probably couldn't, because it's basically, they're just almost moving around randomly. And so this is chaotic state of this system. But what's interesting is that here, they've actually now found a solution. So although there was a chaotic state there, they've now settled into a what I call a dynamic equilibrium. So they found a state which is ordered and will stay there forever now unless it's disturbed. But in, you know, complex systems, things are always disturbed. And so if you imagine that this was the climate system, and these were representing, you know, sea temperature, algal growth, Amazon rainforest cover. But imagine that number 9 is carbon dioxide. So what happens if we move carbon dioxide levels? If you watch what happens to the other ones, when we move it a little bit, they basically all move back into stability. So we've got a balancing feedback system here. So for example, if CO2 levels went up, you might say trees would grow faster, they would draw down more carbon dioxide, and it would self-stabilize. So we've had these self-stabilizing balancing actions going on in the climate system all the time. But what happens if we push CO2 a bit further? So we push CO2 a little bit further, and then we've effectively gone past a tipping point. And now the whole system has gone back into this chaotic realm and is very unpredictable again. And this, for me, as a sort of systems thinker, is what's so scary about the climate crisis, is that when you think in a linear way, you think that if you just reduce CO2, it'll all go back to how it was before. But once you go past a tipping point, as demonstrated in this system, even if I now move 9 CO2 back to where it was, that would not help in this particular situation. And so we could find ourselves in like a kind of runaway climate scenario where we really have lost control of getting it back to a kind of stable climate, which is a pretty scary thing to think about. And I think another reason why we really need to raise systems literacy for people to be able to kind of get their heads around how serious climate change is. But on a more positive spin of what this means, I think you can also say, well, if we want to change society, we want to make things better, society is also a complex system like this, and you can find these tipping points. And once you do find a tipping point, things can change incredibly fast. And so I think, actually, awareness about climate change and action has, I think, actually reached a tipping point in the last few years. And we're still just waiting for it to kind of, actually happen. But in terms of talk, it really has changed, I think. And so the final thing I want to sort of say about this, I think, is such a brilliant concept, is this idea of edge of chaos. So you saw in those two examples, the real life slime molds and in the computer model, these two different realms of a complex system. One where it's chaotic, they're moving around unpredictably. One where they're ordered, they've kind of stabilized, but they're doing something useful. And I think this is an incredibly useful way of thinking about how organizations could operate. And what we've found is that living systems basically always seem to be right on the edge of the ordered regime, able to dip into chaos, not in chaos, in the ordered state, but able to go into chaos if they need to be flexible, if they need to adapt, to find novel solutions to things they've never seen before. And then they want to come back into the ordered state to then get on with their day-to-day lives, do the sort of logistical things that you need to do and just in day-to-day life of an organization, or if you're an organism, breathing and beating your heart at the right pace or whatever. And one way to look at it is on a fitness landscape. So if you imagine this, the peaks here show how good a solution to a certain problem is. So this is an okay solution. This is a really good solution. Now, if you have a very ordered organization, then when it moves around, it will basically go uphill, it will find this state, and then it will get stuck there because it won't have the ability to explore this fitness landscape. But if you are able to dip into that chaotic realm, then the system is then able to move around more randomly, and it then can find this the best peak in the fitness landscape. And so I think that's why organisms seem to have all evolved to be right on the edge of this chaos state, and is that once they find a good fitness peak, they can then stay there. Because if you're obviously in the chaos state all the time, you would never settle there anyway. You just keep moving around. And so it's this idea of being right on the edge of chaos that seems to be the sweet spot. So just in some practical examples, in ecosystems, we know that overly ordered ecosystems are very susceptible to disease or to climate change or fires or whatever, whereas a biodiverse landscape has much more resilience. In society, we can think of very ordered societies they may be ordered, but they generally, the solutions that they find are very unpalatable to most of the population. The other end of it is where it's just kind of chaos. You've got loads of different groups all wanting different things, never able to settle on any particular decision. And possibly, you know, the kind of democratic society that we generally live in may be about right. You know, they probably will be on this edge of chaos where there are regulations, there are rules, but there's also, we allow protest, we allow freedom of speech, we're allowed to criticize the government, we're allowed to come up with all sorts of other ideas and push for them. You know, maybe we're a bit too far in the ordered place, maybe we're too far in the chaotic place. You know, it's just about, I think it's a very interesting concept to look at, you know, where's the sweet spot, where's the best place to be on that line between order and chaos. And so in your organization, what does this mean? You know, when you think of your organization, when you're listening to this, are you thinking, oh, we're sort of a bit too much on the chaotic side, or we're a bit too much on the ordered side? And Stuart Kaufman talks about patching. It's a really interesting way of looking at it. If you've got a single system that acts as a whole, it really is unable to move into the chaotic state and be innovative and adaptable and flexible. If it's split up into very small teams or individuals all acting by themselves, similarly, it's a bit too chaotic and it's not able to ever agree on anything, get anything done. And if there's a sort of mid-size patching, that seems to create this edge of chaos sweet spot. But of course, the exact size of these and the exact number of how you do organize your organization is what, you know, what the challenge is, isn't it? Is how do you set that at the right level, and also how do you split it into groups that are meaningful. And just one last thought. Fritjof Capra talks about the dual nature of organizations. It's good to remember that, of course, both of these structures are happening at the same time. So we've got the ordered structures with the rules and the routines. We've also got the emergent structures also happening all the time, because people are always having conversations, and people are inherently, you know, complex just because they're humans. And so it's interesting to kind of recognize that they're both happening, and that one way to encourage the more emergent structures is just to see that they're there and to value them and to give them a bit more voice or a bit more power, rather than just seeing them as kind of irrelevant noise. So I think that's me, and I just wondered if, you know, people have any questions or comments just in the last couple of minutes about what this means to you. I'd be really interested to hear.
Good, thank you very much, Robin. As you have said, we are on the last 2 to 3 minutes. So any comment that you might have, any idea that you might have, please do share it with us.
Yeah, maybe just a spontaneous comment. Overall, what touched me is that traditionally we think about managing the chaos through structure processes, I mean, structured approaches. And it seems that maybe to be fluid and not so structured could be a way to manage more effectively the chaos.
Yeah.
Robin,
Hi.
you know, it's a bit disturbing always when I wake up, remember these facts in nature. And I just hope that we are, as humans, are all clever enough to make it work. But how is it in companies? So if you say control doesn't work, and we have leaders, and so there is not a, so what do you suggest them to be to practice as a leadership practice?
I don't think I would say I'm the expert on exactly. I think there's a lot more people at this conference who would probably be more expertise in that, I suppose. But I suppose, I mean, there's quite a few things that come to mind. I think that idea that you would just have one leader, or you would have defined leaders. I think in complex systems, it would tend to be more that you have, you know, people take on leadership roles at certain times, and by what they're doing, they happen to be something that other people in the group want to follow. Maybe they're inspiring, maybe they've come up with a great idea. And I think that sort of leadership does make a lot of sense. I think when you have somebody who's defined as the leader and then has power to make the decisions without allowing the others in the group to contribute, that might be the sort of problematic type of control that I'm talking about.
Thank you. Super. Yeah.